Philip in 338 BC. After his complete triumph at the Battle of Chaeronea, he stood at the pinnacle of his power. He had defeated all of his opponents through a clever mix of diplomacy and warfare. It had been 20 years since he achieved his first victory over the Dardanians in 358 BC, and now he was absolute master over Greece. But Philip didn't want to press the issue any further. His end goal was never to subjugate Greece under a tyranny, but rather to unify them against a common enemy, Persia. Persia's recent moves in Phoenicia and Egypt caused alarm that the empire was regaining all of its former glory. If the Persians did cross the Hellespont, Philip could use Thrace as one gigantic battleground before they even reached Macedon. But Philip was determined not to let that happen. He wanted to take the fight to the Persians on their own territory. It was with that in mind that he formed the League of Corinth in 337 BC. All Greek city-states joined the confederation with the lone exception of Sparta. Of course, Sparta had refused to deal with Philip before, so this was not too surprising. The League guaranteed that all of its members would be given autonomy and freedom from attack, and if a member state was attacked, the rest would come to its defense. Philip was made hegemon over the League, and each member was required to take a sworn oath to not only the League, but also Philip. In a few years, Thebes would find out what breaking this oath meant. In any event, one of the first acts of the League was to declare war on Persia, and not surprisingly, made Philip the commander. Although the Greek city-states might have been bitterly divided about almost every possible issue, the one thing they almost all supported was a campaign against the Persians. This had broad support, even from notable philosophers and orators such as Isocrates. In 336 BC, Philip dispatched his leading general Parmenio to Persia with an army of 10,000. This was more of an expeditionary force to make preparations for the main army. In addition, the army would free Greeks living on the western coast and islands of Asia Minor. Interestingly, the Persians did nothing to stop Parmenio and allowed him to cross the Hellespont unopposed. With everything in place, Philip decided to take a well-needed rest and return to Macedonia for a wedding ceremony. Philip's daughter Cleopatra of Macedon would marry Alexander I of Epirus. This would seal a great alliance between Epirus and Macedon. The wedding was to take place in the city of Aegae. Aegae was the original capital of Macedon. Even though the capital of Macedon had since been moved to Pella, Aegae remained a very important city. Royal weddings were still held there, and Macedonian kings were often buried there. Justin describes what happened next. Straight away, Philip set in motion plans for gorgeous sacrifices to the gods, joined with the wedding of his daughter Cleopatra. He wanted as many Greeks as possible to take part in the festivities in honor of the gods, and so he planned brilliant musical contests and lavish banquets for his friends and guests. Finally, the drinking was over, and the start of the games set for the following day. While it was still dark, the multitude of spectators hastened into the theater, and at sunrise the parade formed. Along with a lavish display of every sort, Philip included in the procession statues of the 12 gods, wrought with great artistry and adorned with a dazzling show of wealth to strike awe in the beholder. And along with these was conducted a 13th statue, suitable for a god, that of Philip himself, so that the king exhibited himself enthroned among the 12 gods. Every seat in the theater was taken when Philip appeared wearing a white cloak, and by his express orders, his bodyguard held away from him and followed only at a distance, since he wanted to show publicly that he was protected by the goodwill of all Greeks and he had no need of a guard of spearmen. End quote. At this point, Diodorus cuts away from this spectacle and talks about Pausanias. To make a long story short, Pausanias was a member of Philip's personal guard, and according to Diodorus, he held a personal grudge against Philip. We continue on with the account. Quote, Pausanias posted horses at the gates of the city and came to the entrance of the theater carrying a Celtic dagger under his cloak. When Philip directed his attending friends to precede him into the theater, and while the guards kept their distance, he saw that the king was left alone, rushed at him, pierced him through his ribs, and stretched him out dead, then ran for the gates and the horses which he had prepared for his flight. Immediately one group of the bodyguards hurried to the body of the king, while the rest poured out in pursuit of the assassin. Having a good start, Pausanias would have mounted his horse before they could catch him had he not caught his boot in a vine and fallen. As he was scrambling to his feet, Perdiccas and the rest came up with him and killed him with their javelins. Such was the end of Philip, who had made himself the greatest of the kings in Europe in his time, and because of the extent of his kingdom, had made himself a throned companion of the 12 gods." End quote. And so Pausanias did what no army or general could do before: eliminate Philip. And even then, it had to be one of Philip's bodyguards, and even worse, an attack from behind. Philip never stood a chance. Philip was given an elaborate funeral and buried in AGI, the same city where he was assassinated. The tomb was rediscovered in the 20th century, and amazingly it laid intact and undisturbed throughout the ages. Many treasures were discovered. Among the most important item found was a silver and gold crown engraved with a Hercules knot. It is believed that Philip was actually wearing this during the assassination. This was likely crafted by one of the finest jewelers in the region, and the gilding process for the crown would have involved gold leaf being burnished on top of silver. While there is little doubt that Pausanias assassinated Philip, the motives behind the killing are not well understood and probably never will be. Ancient chroniclers have pointed to Pausanias as having a personal grudge against Philip. They have even pointed the finger at Alexander and his mother as the main conspirators. Modern historians have poked credible holes in almost all of these suppositions, and so the reasons for Philip's assassination are difficult to determine. But I will give my personal thoughts on this. Do I think lowly little Pausanias was the sole person behind all of this? No, I find that very difficult to believe. He must have had some form of help. But who is behind this? Well, the problem here is that Philip's meteoric rise made him many enemies both inside and outside Greece. You could probably put together a list of suspects so long that it would literally fill up an entire book. Any one of them could have orchestrated this. So this likely will remain one of the greatest cold cases in history. In any event, the newly crowned Alexander faced immediate dangers from literally every corner of his kingdom. City after city began to threaten or renounce their allegiance. Advised by his deputies to hold peace conferences, Alexander chose the opposite. He would crush the resistance. He was not about to let the kingdom that his father built from scratch fall apart. Still, the cities around Greece rejoiced, thinking that Alexander was no Philip. If they could have traveled 2,200 years later, they might have had second thoughts after reading one historian's description of Alexander's ascension to the throne. Quote, "We have seen how he came to the throne. Once fairly seated, he speedily showed that though his father had forged the tools he found ready to his hand, he himself could wield them with a suddenness, boldness, and decision of which Philip was probably never capable. No man was ever in so full a sense the leader of an army. He fought with it, commanded it, and handled it in an almost superhuman way. Always an absolute example to soldiers and officers, he has nothing from high or low that he was not able to do better himself, and willing to undertake." End quote.